afternoon or maybe good morning, everyone. And thank you for coming. My name is Yudai Ezaki from Tohoku University and Graduate School of Science, Japan. Today, I would like to talk about observation-based assessment of three-dimensional radiative transfer effect with ASKER. Let me first introduce the concept of 3D RT effect. In many Earth system models, the atmospheric radiation is calculated using an approximation called the independent current approximation, or ICA, because full 3D radiative transfer calculation are computationally very expensive. However, in the real atmosphere, radiation is scattered and absorbed repeatedly while propagating in any directions. So the computational bias caused by this approximation is called the three-dimensional radiative transfer effect, or 3D RT effect. Through errors in radiative flux and atmospheric heating rate, 3D RT effects can influence calculations of global radiation budget and cloud dynamics. So they are therefore known to contribute to uncertainty in climate change projections. For this reason, it is important to quantify 3D RT effect based on observational data. As many of you know, ASKER is characterized by simultaneous observations with multiple sensors. Passive sensors like MSI, multispectral imager, provide information on the horizontal distribution of clouds and atmospheric properties. In contrast, active sensors like CPR or ATRIT provide curtain image like vertical profiles of the atmosphere. So by combining these complementary observations, we can estimate three-dimensional cloud properties, including liquid and ice water content, or particle effective radius, or particle type, or something like that. So the objective of this study are divided into two parts. First, I aim to develop a reliable pipeline for calculating three-dimensional radiative quantities using ASKER observations. This is also a step toward developing ASKER-based three-dimensional radiative products. Second, I aim to quantify the characteristics of 3D RT effects based on satellite observed cloud structures. For this purpose, I compare three-dimensional and one-dimensional radiative transfer calculations and examine how cloud structure influence radiance or top of the atmosphere flux and atmospheric heating rates. Based on this motivation, we are developing an ASKER-based three-dimensional radiative product using the JAXA products, JAXA processors. And this product includes three main radiative quantities for now: radiance and radiative flux and atmospheric heating rate. And as input products, we use MSI RGR, the level 1 observation product from MSI, and MSI CRP, ACCRP, that's the combined radar and LiDAR information, and the additional product like OUX 2D, OUX MET. From these input products, we reconstruct three-dimensional atmospheric field and then perform radiative transfer simulations. And for validation, the simulated radiative quantities are compared with BBR-derived observational radiation products like BM-RAT or BMA flux. Also, for comparison, I use all-RAD product, which is JAXA standard radiation product calculated with a one-dimensional radiative transfer model. And to construct the three-dimensional atmospheric field, I use the 3D scene reconstruction algorithm suggested by Barker 2011. This algorithm is based on the pixel matching approach. So for each MSI pixel, it searches for a donor pixel whose MSI observed radiance are most similar. Then the vertical atmospheric profile at the donor pixel is assigned to the target pixel. By applying this algorithm, we reconstruct the three-dimensional distributions of the physical quantities required for radiative transfer calculations, including cloud extinction coefficient or water content or temperature or atmospheric gas profile. Yes, movie. This video shows the across track cross section distribution of extinction coefficient following this red lines. So this page is detailed information of the calculations. And the calculation is domain for radiative flux are defined consistently with BM-RAD and BMA-flux product domains. Specifically, we use 10 times 10 kilometer standard domain for radiance calculation and 21 times 5 kilometer assessment domain for flux calculation. Based on this geometrical configuration, radiative flux are calculated at reference altitude 20 kilometer as a top of atmosphere. And radiances and fluxes are computed using M-Sister backward Monte Carlo radiative transfer model. In Monte Carlo approach, many photons trajectories are randomly sampled and the scattering and absorption process are simulated within the atmospheric field. And by statistically averaging the contribution from these photon paths, the model estimates radiances and flux for each point. The model calculates upward radiances and fluxes at the top of the atmosphere. And atmospheric heating rates are calculated for each grid box using a volume integration of radiance. This is equivalent to evaluating the divergence of the net radiative flux, but here it is estimated from a local radiance field within each grid volume. Here, I compare the simulated radiance with BBR observations. This figure shows two observation scenes where the red line indicate BBR observation and the blue line indicate the simulated radiance. The simulation show high correlations with the observations, like over 0.88 for shortwave radiation and 0.78 for longwave radiation. This indicates that the model reproduces the observed spatial variations of radiance well. Although some residual differences remain, the agreement is sufficiently good for the following analysis of 3D radiative transfer effects. Next, I compare the radiative fluxes. For this comparison, I use two reference products, BMA flux, which is a BBR-derived flux product, and all-RAD, which is calculated using one-dimensional radiative transfer. As shown in the figure, our product shows good agreement with both PMA flux and previous ORAD products. And this indicates that the overall magnitude and spatial variation of the simulated flux are reasonably reproduced. The bottom two panel shows the distribution of the shortwave flux difference. And this dashed line indicates the ASCII emission target of 10 watt per square meter for radiative flux accuracy. Large variations are mainly found around cloud regions, and the RMSE is about 40 to 60 watt per square meter. Although this difference is larger than the mission target at the local scale, it reflects strong spatial variability associated with cloud structure and 3D effects. Therefore, these results suggest that our product successfully captures the cloud-related radiative flux variations, while further refinement is needed for more accurate local flux estimation. Next, I will show case result of the atmospheric heating rate calculation. Here, the calculated heating rates are shown separately for shortwave and longwave radiation. The figure represents vertical cross-section along the ASCII observation track. In these plots, warm color represent radiative heating and cool colors represent radiative cooling. For shortwave radiation, the atmosphere is generally heated by absorption of solar radiation. On the other hand, for longwave radiation, the atmosphere mainly shows cooling, which is caused by the thermal emission for the atmosphere itself. Now let us focus on the difference between one-dimensional and three-dimensional calculations in the shortwave heating rate. The red arrows indicate the incident direction of solar radiation. When we look at the 3D minus 1D difference, we can clearly see a pattern that corresponds to the direction of incoming solar radiation. This occurs because 3D radiative transfer allows horizontal energy transport, which is not represented in the 1D calculation. So as a result, effects such as illumination of cloud side and oblique cloud shadows appears in heating rate field. Therefore, this is a clear example showing that three-dimensional radiative transfer effects are directly reflected in the distribution of atmospheric heating. Then, what spatial scales do 3D radiative transfer effect become important? I examined the spatial scales of 3D radiative transfer effects using the power spectrum of radiance variation along the ASCII track. For shortwave radiation, the 3D minus 1D differences are clear from a few kilometers to about 50 kilometers. This indicates that shortwave 3D effects are mainly associated with cloud field variability below about 50 kilometers. On the other hand, for longwave radiation, the difference are much more localized and mainly appears at scales of few kilometers only. So this indicates that shortwave 3D RT effects are controlled by cloud field variability from a few kilometers to about 50 kilometers, whereas longwave 3D effects are mainly linked to smaller scale local cloud structure. Finally, I summarize the global impact on the radiative flux budget. By combining the shortwave and longwave components, the net 3D RT effect is about 5.9 watt per square meter as a global mean. This means that the difference between 3D and 1D radiative transfer calculation is not negligible even in global mean. The sign of the effect shows that horizontal radiative transport systematically shift the radiation budget toward a cooling contribution. Therefore, using only one-dimensional radiative transfer calculation can miss the cooling contribution and lead to a systematic bias in the estimated radiative energy balance. And this slide shows the solar zenith angle dependence of 3D RT effects. This left figure shows the 3D RT effects as a function of solar zenith angle. Here, smaller solar zenith angle means that sunlight comes more from above, while the large angles means the sunlight comes more from the side. For shortwave radiation, the 3D RT effect is mostly negative at small solar zenith angles. This is because in the solar 3D calculation, solar radiation can escape horizontally from cloud sides, reducing the upward reflected flux. As the solar zenith angle increases, this negative effect becomes weaker around 65 degrees. The sign change from negative to positive. This is likely because the side illumination of clouds become more important than side when sunlight comes from a lower angle. So this result shows that shortwave 3D RT effect strongly depends on the direction of incoming sunlight. Okay. Finally, I would like to introduce an interesting case study as a potential scientific application of the developed 3D radiation product. As maybe many of you know, on April 13, 2026, a scare passed almost directly over the eye of Typhoon Sinraku and captured its detailed spatial structure. This is a very variable observation case, and it has attracted strong interest from the science community. Therefore, although the analysis is still at a very preliminary point, I would like to take a fast look at the radiative heating rate distribution in this case. This purpose here is not to draw a definitive conclusion from a single snapshot, but to demonstrate how this type of 3D radiation product could be used to investigate the possible links between radiative heating structures and such kind of cloud dynamics. Here, the focus is on the shortwave radiative heating near the eye of Typhoon. You can clearly see, compared with the 3D calculation, the top one is 1D heating rate, middle one is 3D heating rate, and bottom one is different. The 1D calculation shows stronger radiative heating in the eye and inner core region. This suggests that the 1D calculation may overestimate heating near the Typhoon center. One possible reason is that the 1D calculation cannot represent shadowing and horizontal photon transport caused by surrounding eye wall crust and upper level ambient. Such an overestimation may introduce a positive bias in the thermodynamic support of the inner core circulation. In other words, the 1D calculation may make a Typhoon center appears more radiatively supported than it actually is. This does not directly prove a change in Typhoon intensity or lifetime because this is an offline, just snapshot-based analysis. However, it suggests that 3D radiative effects could be relevant for estimating Typhoon intensity or maintenance and lifetime. Okay, to summarize, we developed an ASCII-based 3D radiative product using multi-sensor observation and the JAXA processor, providing radiance and radiative flux and atmospheric heating rate from reconstructed 3D atmospheric fields. And the product showed good agreement with PBR-derived radiance and flux products, supporting the reliability of the framework. Using this product, we detected physically consistent 3D RT effects. In particular, shortwave 3D effects appeared at scales from a few kilometers to about 50 kilometers and showed clear dependence on solar zenith angle. Finally, the combined shortwave and longwave 3D effect was estimated to be about 5.9 watts per square meter, indicating a cooling bias when 1D radiative transfer is used. Overall, these results demonstrate that ASCII-based 3D radiation product can provide a useful framework for quantifying three-dimensional radiative transfer effects and for investigating their potential impacts on atmospheric process. That's it. Thank you for listening.